and it happens to be a Harley. So I know a lot. I find that most people like change the oil and do a lot of stuff on their own. Do you do that?
In my case, no, actually I don't, because I usually take mine in to get inspected. I just get the oil change at the same time. It's just a lot easier. It isn't that much more expensive, and they appreciate it. So
how often do you get oil changes on a
motorcycle?
Once
a year usually.
That's all?
Well, this year.
How much mileage?
This year is going to be twice, because I already put 3,000 miles on it, just going to Florida and back.
Oh, you don't ride that much.
Okay.
I mean, what do you usually put on in a year?
Well, since I bought the bike, I've put on almost 23,000 miles.
And how long have you had the bike?
About 7 years.
I mean, like, I do that in a week.
You don't have a bike, Jill.
I know, but I ride on other people's bikes. Oh, I hear a voice in the background.
That's Pete.
Yeah.
Oh, Pete, hi. Ha ha. Everybody's laughing. I don't have a bike. One of these days I will, and I'll put you all to shame. I really will.
Thank you for the support. Appreciate it.
I thought we had Paul back. All right, so since we have Pete here, do you want to introduce him, and then we can start talking about the topic at hand for tonight?
Why don't you introduce him?
All right, well, yeah, I wrote something up here. Let me see if I can find it.
Oh.
Yeah, I did. I thought I did.
It says our guest tonight is Dr. Peter Hunt, an innovative chiropractor and energy healer. He is trained and certified in Reiki and many other chiropractic techniques. Pete is a close friend of Lady Fontaine's and has been adjusting Lady Fontaine in person and remotely for years. He's in the process of developing an innovative healing technique that goes way beyond the traditional chiropractic or the physical, and we are excited to have him on the show to discuss some of his revolutionary techniques. Dr. Hunt works out of his Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania office. Welcome, Dr. Peter Hunt. Yay! Come on.
Yay!
Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear when Lady Fontaine does get her own motorcycle.
Oh, here we go.
You know it's
sorry.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So thank you. But Pete, so we're very happy to have you on the show. And before we actually jump into talking about what you're doing, either Jim, if you want to take the lead on this, or Pete, if you do, I would like a little bit of an explanation on energy. Like, you know, is energy what's actually healing us in the techniques that you're using, Pete? Or Jim, you're an acupuncturist, plus you use other methodologies, I think, in your healing technique. What is energy? Tonight's show is energy healing. What is that?
We'll let Jim go first.
Why? Go ahead.
It's been said and it's been known for quite some time. Everything in the universe boils down to basically just energy. If you go on the subatomic level, there basically is nothing there. It's just energy, but it's not just energy. It's energy, and the quality of the energy is made up by the quality of the information. So that makes up the resonance of the energy.
What does that mean, made up of the information? What do you mean by that?
Like if somebody is like very, very negative, very, very down, very criticizing of other people and themselves, then the quality of that information is going to be different from the quality of energy that somebody would have who is always have or strives to have a very positive outlook and tries to find the best in other people.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that. Now, Jim, let me ask you, from your perspective, what's energy healing, or do you have anything to add?
I never use energy at all. I use chi.
Oh. And what is chi? Isn't chi a form of energy?
Well, that's one way some people interpret it. Chi is a thing that flows in the body. It's a life force, if you will, it's like prana. And similar to prana, it's not the same, but it comes from a similar root because both of them come from the idea of exhaling or breath. So it has more to do with something that's. The problem is that I get confused with energy, meaning the article of physics, and the energy that I'm working with in the body, because I don't believe that they're the same thing because I can measure the energy in physics, but I can't seem to measure the energy in the body.
Well, let me ask you this. I claim to read energy. Mm-hmm. What type of energy would you classify that as?
Well, you're reading energy.
Is that the measurable, or is it more that esoteric that you're talking about?
If you're using a magnetometer, then you would be reading magnetic energy using a machine.
And that's what I'm going to
So you're using your mind, so it must be something going on between you and that person that isn't something I can measure with the box. Okay.
Exactly.
So that's my problem, because I get kind of unhappy with the idea of using energy, because a physicist would go absolutely berserk listening to it, because it's not what they're talking about when they're talking about energy.
But perhaps when they talk about quantum physics, it is.
Perhaps, but perhaps not. I mean, perhaps because quantum physics happens on such a microscopic level that I don't think it would be that easy to be such an impact using massive macroscopic levels that we live on comparatively.
I'm not an acupuncturist, but the way I've always understood prana or chi, to me those words are interchangeable, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but that's the universal life force energy.
Right.
So,
it's universal life force. They don't put the word energy in there in a translation necessarily, but it is a universal life force. That's right.
All right. Well, I mean, we don't even have to use the word energy. We could use life force. Life force. Exactly. That would be more, because to me, it's all different ways of saying the same thing.
Okay.
It's something. A lot of it is we try to come up with words. We try to come up with descriptions of stuff that is beyond description and beyond knowing everything that there is to know about it. It's just accepting that it's there, knowing that it's there, and knowing that we're very much a part of it and using it to our advantage to help ourselves and others.
And I think that even using the word life force would work for the work that I do as well. It's something that I'm able to tap into. If it's someone's life force or prana or chi or energy, to me, I use the word energy. But
people get hung up. They get hung up on the words. And there's an old Eckhart Tolle saying where people get hung up on the word, but they don't realize the word is actually just a signpost, and they don't look to where the signpost is pointing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I agree. I do agree with that. So, since we have several different words that we could use to describe whatever it is that each of us tap into, Pete, I've known you for a long time. I've seen the evolution of you going from what I would call a more traditional chiropractor to where you're headed right now. And it's a very fascinating process for me to watch, because in many ways I'm involved with it. But I would like you to, if you don't mind, explain a little bit about the process, what you're doing, how you're tying in certain things, how you're evolving, and what it is that you're actually doing. And I wish that we had the opportunity of having Paul, because I know you've done a session with him. And after you did a session with him, you talked to me, and I changed everything for you. And then you did a session with me today, which totally changed everything. So I wish we could get Paul on, but he's having some audio issues right now. But can you give us a little bit of an idea, or sort of like a picture or a storyline of where you started from, where you are now, and where you're headed?
Well, where I'm headed is, I have no idea. It's where I'm supposed to be headed. That's all I know, and I'm very excited about it. But no, it all started when I first got out of chiropractic school, and I got involved with metaphysics, became a Reiki master, and so on. I did some of it for a little bit, but then I got involved in more traditional chiropractic, moved around a bit, and so on. And it hasn't been until fairly recently that I kind of returned to metaphysical roots. A lot of that started probably about 4 or 5 years ago, when I got to know a chiropractor by the name of Dr. Ted Koren, Koren, who developed his own technique. He's been very well known in the industry for years. But he uses biofeedback and ask the body questions and so on. There's other techniques that do it, like applied kinesiology and so on. We'll use biofeedback, but the way he does it, where you can use your own hands as a yes/no to get answers of questions that you're asking about the patient and what to adjust, where to adjust, how to adjust. And he
Could
also
I interrupt on that? Could I interrupt on that for a minute? Because I've had
Sure.
that method done.
Yes.
Isn't there like four spots or something? It's been a while since I've gone to a chiropractor that does that, but isn't there like 4 spots and they tap on those spots and those spots give them information about the rest
No.
of the body?
Nope.
No?
This is
Oh.
I don't know what you're thinking about, but that's totally different.
All right. So
No,
explain.
but he talked about being able doing a remote adjusting, and that's when I started doing that. I started doing because I did some remote adjusting with you. I remember I've done that several times.
Yes.
And I would do a remoting adjusting with my mom during lockdown because I couldn't see her physically, so I would do stuff remotely with her. And there was a couple other people that I would do on occasion remotely as well. And I found that quite interesting because you're not just adjusting them, but you would also, I would find that when I was adjusting people remotely, a lot of times things that you could not do physically would come up, and the person energetically would want to be adjusted this particular way, which physically was impossible. Like, for example, a couple times I did it with somebody where they needed to have their atlas, their first cervical vertebrae, adjusted, but they needed to have their atlas adjusted during their birth process. As weird as that sounds, that's what came up.
Wow!
That's what came up. So that kind of weird, funky sort of stuff.
So that, because let me make mention of the fact that there have been many times in the past that something gets out of kilter and I'm now hundreds of miles away from Pete. So, or even if I wasn't and I was at a dog show or something, that I would call Pete and I'd go, "Oh, Pete, I've got such pain somewhere." And he would say, like, I'm with the patient. Like, as soon as I get finished, I'll deal. We hear you, Paul. We'll deal with it. And then he might say to me, like, "All right, I'll be able to do it in an hour from now." And then about 10 minutes after that, I'm just going, "Oh man, I could feel Pete working on me. I feel so much better." And then 2 seconds later, phone rings. It's Pete. "Gee, I had a minute here and I just worked on you." And magically, I'm feeling better when I didn't even know for sure he was working on me. So whatever he does and however he did the traditional remote healing was kind of, for me, absolutely amazing. It absolutely was. And it worked every single time.
Yeah, but it was Dr. Cord and Dr. Ted Cord, and working with him and taking some of his seminars and listening to his lectures and so on, that inspired me to pick that up and to work with that in my own way.
And then Pete started, like he said, it might come up that you need to adjust the atlas, but at birth. And I remember he used to give me notes after he would do some work with me, and it would say, "I adjusted L5, and this had something to do with 3 lifetimes ago with one of your dogs," or something like that. He was getting that other kind of information. And you're not a psychic, Pete. Where do you think that was coming from? And how do you think you were getting that information?
I'm not really sure, but I would ask questions. It's a yes or no. It's not like you're posing really complicated questions. It's a yes or no. So I would say, zero it down to L5. Okay, how do I adjust L5? Standing, and then something would pop. It's like, do I adjust it in this lifetime? No. Okie dokie. Then it would lead me down another rabbit hole. So then you start questioning. So you would just keep asking questions.
Okay, you would just keep asking questions until you would find, because it would be fascinating, the notes that I would get from him about the various adjustments that he did. So then from there, where did you go, and how did you get to where you are right now, which is pretty fascinating.
Well, and then I was working on my own chiropractic stuff with patients and so on, and because there's dozens of different chiropractic techniques, well over 50, probably 60. And there's a couple of them that the only thing they address is the upper cervical area. So I came up with my own way of analyzing the upper cervical area, meaning the atlas and axis, and being able to gently realign that and then be able to recheck. But also, too, I learned a technique called cranial release technique. Now, that has to do with what's called the meninges, or the dura mater in the skull. That three-layered membrane that lines the skull. It attaches at only certain places throughout the spine and down in the pelvis. And that was supposed to relieve all the tension in that in the dural system. It works very, very well, but as I discovered that it didn't do the whole ball of wax. So it just led me to look at other ways to do it.
Can I interrupt you for a sec? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are you talking about craniosacral? Is it related to that?
No, it's different.
No.
He's done it to me.
Let Peter answer, please. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm waiting for your answer, Peter.
He wants to hear it from you, not me.
Okay, all right. And also, too, there's another technique. A number of years ago, I became interested in a technique, a very esoteric technique called network spinal analysis, developed by a chiropractor from Brooklyn, Dr. Donnie Epstein.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by this technique, and Lady Fontana's had it done as well. And I found the chiropractor who does it. He had a very loyal following, very, very good at what he does, but I never really felt that I got a lot out of it, and I was very disappointed about that. But I was still fascinated with the approach that they had. And I also
Could I interject here, too, and say,
sure.
though, for me, network was life-changing because
I know it was.
Right. I had, and even the information, actually, I don't know if you told Donnie Epstein or the gal down here, the chiropractor down here, but he knew about my success because I went in there with a lot of breathing issues due to 9/11, and the World Trade Center Health Program told me I would never get better. And I would say in the past 4 or 5 years, every one of my pulmonary function tests are normal. There's no breathing issues. And I was down to 25% breathing capacity, and now I'm normal. So network for me was phenomenal.
Yeah, they do no adjusting, and they do not adjust at all.
No adjustments. It's touch.
Right. So
it's touch and something like this.
Mr. Epstein wrote a book that I really appreciate, 12 Stages of Healing.
Yes.
Yep.
We all read that, yes.
Yeah, phenomenal book.
Yes.
The guy is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
He is. Yeah. Pete, before you go on, though, Jim was very curious about that cranial release technique. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Pete, I just want to add that Pete has done it to me, and I would drive 10 hours right now to have it done. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. Pete, could you explain a little bit about that?
Cranial release was derived from an original Irish osteopathic technique called biocranial, which was, I think the guy's name was Dr. Boyd, Irish osteopath, who developed this technique. And the American Dr. William Duresti developed that and came up with a cranial release technique. What it is, it's a gentle stretch, but it looks very simple. And actually, it kind of is simple, but it has to be done precisely. Where what you're doing, it's a stretch, specific stretch on the trapezius muscle on both sides, starting with the left side, then the right side. The head has to be positioned directly, and that relieves the excessive dural tension in the cerebral basilar junction. Right at the base of the skull where the foramen magnum is. It takes like a minute to do, not even a minute to do. And it can be really, really powerful stuff. So I drove to, when I found out about that, I drove from Stroudsburg to Paramus, New Jersey, I think every Thursday morning for a while to get it done and learn how to do it.
Good. Very good. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, it was. I swear by that. But go ahead. So tell us more about how you got to where you are, and really what you do now, and what you're discovering about what you're doing now.
Okay, and certainly, obviously, we'll get into it. A lot of it is with your help and input, because that's been that's been crucial through the whole process. But when I went to Network, the first time I went to Network, the first time they did a contact on me, because I know Dr. Epstein, he gathered stuff from other techniques, and then he put his own thing together, his own spin on stuff, and obviously took it way further. And the first contact, it was down my coccyx, and I realized, he got this from a technique called Logan Basic. And I asked the chiropractor, is a technique been around for over 100 years called Logan Basic. There's a Logan College of Chiropractic in Kansas City, Missouri. And it's a specific contact on the sacrotuberous ligament, the one that runs from the sacrococcygeal area down to what's called the ischial tuberosity on the posterior part of the upper femur, basically called the sits bone, because that's what we sit on. And so it's a specific contact on that, but that helps to release the excessive dural tension, because the very end of that meningeal system is the coccyx. And so that helps to release that area. And I still remember, it was probably like 5-6 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, whatever. But there was a lady who's since moved out of the area. She came in and she had an ocular migraine. Her eye was throbbing. And the dural membrane, the meninges, coat our optic nerve, and the whites of our eye, which is called the sclera, that's a continuation of the dura, which is why it's white. So I made that contact. Within 10 seconds, her headache was completely gone. I'm like, that blew us both away. And like I said to her, it's like, I love it when people make me look smart. So it's like, yeah, that it shocked me as much as it shocked her.
Well, and I'm sure that was life-changing for her.
Oh yeah, no, it was sad to see her go, but also too, it's continued to evolve in realizing that a lot of the problems that physically that people have, and also more than physically, has to do with that excessive dural tension. I mean, either Paul or Jim was talking about the craniosacral work, Dr. Upledger's stuff, and Dr. Upledger was another guy who was a revolutionary and a genius. Absolutely no doubt about that.
Oh, craniosacral work is phenomenal, I find, anyhow.
Yep, and he did a lot of research at the University of Michigan back in the 70s, where he showed definitively that the bones in the skull move, because it's taught in this country that the bones in the skull are fused together, which is not true. The bones in the skull expand to contract 7 or 8 times a minute, and the cerebral spinal fluid and the dural membrane moves up and down inside of the spinal column as well. And then the sacrum flexes, the base of the sacrum flexes and extends. So there's a continual subtle movement. But so I continued working with that over the last couple of years, and just a little while ago, maybe like 2 months ago, not very long ago, I was watching something on YouTube. I watch the usual nonsensical, mindless dribble on YouTube like everybody else does, but I also learn a lot of stuff from YouTube as well. And so I was watching a lecture by a guy named Dr. Jay Holder. Dr. Jay Holder started off as a medical doctor. Then he had a very profound chiropractic experience, so he became a chiropractor. So he's both DC and MD. He was giving a lecture down at the Life Chiropractic College, and he was talking about tonal chiropractic, TONAL. And just something really, really hit me profoundly when he was talking. And because I'd known about him for a while, I just wasn't ready to hear what he had to say. I mean, the effect of what he had to say. And I was aware of the technique that he developed. He developed a technique called torque release technique, which was invented, or he came up with this out of a research project that they did at the University of Miami Medical School. Well, somewhere in Florida, I think it was University of Miami, but it was an addiction study. And so this technique and he has his own adjusting instrument called an integrator, which is vastly different than a regular two-dimensional linear adjusting instrument. It applies a specific force in 3 dimensions, because on this plane we're three-dimensional, and it applies the force, a measured force in 3 dimensions. It's pretty cool stuff. So I wanted to buy the instrument, and I talked to him on the phone, and actually he was very, very nice. I talked to him for about 20 minutes. He liked the fact that I did Logan Basic, because we talked about the importance of that as far as the whole craniosacral system. But the whole idea of his technique, and there's a few other ones that do it that I've discovered, is tone. And most people know that the brain and the spinal cord control all the functions in the body. Yep. I mean, obviously, Dr. Upledger knew that, and certainly other people have known that too. Dr. Epstein, and so on and so forth. No, that controls everything. So the body is a bioelectrical system. Every cell in the body is a little tiny battery, negative charge inside, positive outside, with electrical gradient around the cell wall. But all the cells in the body do not connect directly to the central nervous system. So how does it communicate? It communicates through tone, through resonance, Hertz frequency. And the healthy Hertz frequencies are multiple of 5, like the vagus nerve, base of the skull, that fires at 10 Hertz per second, which is 10 electrical impulses per second. Every part of the body, like the liver, has a different frequency from the heart, has a different frequency from the pancreas, because they have different functions. But when the central nervous system is in tune, it's able to respond and give the proper information to all these different parts of the body. Everything is communicating. Everything is in harmony, much like a musical instrument, guitar, upright bass, or so on. I had a little epiphany last week where I was thinking, where I had a little idea about a hammock. A person wants to lie in a hammock. The hammock's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. What do? You don't do anything with the middle part of the hammock. You work on the top and the bottom of the hammock to adjust the middle of it. And once the tone and tension in the middle of the hammock is good, then you're good to go, and then you can take a nice, long, relaxing nap. So Dr. Holder talked about restoring normal tone and working and checking and working these areas where there's excessive meningeal tension. They have their own way of doing it. I've come up with my own way of doing it. I still want to get certified in it. They have a seminar coming up in September. Now, we add in one more thing. Last year, I found out about this particular thing called higher brain living. Now, I had never heard of it before. It was interesting because I had a dream where I knew there was something really, really big and new coming up for me. I had no idea what it was. It was like, okay, I'll just wait until it shows up. And then I had a dream a little while later. I had a dream about network spinal analysis. And it was a very vivid dream. And I didn't know does this mean I need to return and get network done again? I just wasn't ready for it before. I don't know. So all of a sudden on my Facebook page, I started seeing ads for this particular thing called network spinal analysis. And this guy, Dr. Michael Cotton, who was doing this particular thing, he's a chiropractor, but when I watched him do his work, it looked just like network. And I thought, I even posted on there, it's like, this is a network ripoff. This is a ripoff of Dr. Epstein's work. But I started to look more into it. And the purpose of higher brain living is to remove the latent energy that is built up and runs our body from the hindbrain, the primitive brain, which is the way human beings originally evolved, was using the hindbrain, the reptilian brain, which helps to keep us safe, and it's basically geared towards survival, fight or flight, always on the defensive, and always on the lookout for a threat, and never really changing or growing the way we're supposed to, because what his idea was to be able to take energy from the hindbrain, which we still need, but we don't need it to run our life, according to him, and move it into the prefrontal cortex, which is the most recent part of physiological evolution, and that's where the potential of the highest states of consciousness, spiritual awareness, and other life experiences. That's where that potential resides, and they've been able to do it with higher brain living. They've been doing EEGs and so on, and they can find the prefrontal cortex lighting up like it would in somebody who's been meditating 5 hours a day for 40 years. So I found the person in New Jersey who does it. Now, what I found was what's going on with what I'm doing now is I like the higher brain living. I don't want to learn how to do it. It's a whole process. It's really, really good stuff. But I realized that the pathways that Dr. Epstein stuff goes through, the pathways that the higher brain living stuff goes through with their contacts, the main conduit is the central nervous system, the spinal cord, and the brain. It's like an antenna that we used to have on our cars, the little wire, and then the little ball on top, representing the spine and the brain. That's so. So once I started doing that, I realized, okay, if I can clear the central nervous system out first, get that in tune the best way I possibly can, then do contacts, everything's wide open. So now I do the contacts, and then there's a clear path for the energy shift, going from I shouldn't say that because I'm not doing higher brain living, and that's one of the ways Jill comes in. I would work on her, and I knew I was doing something pretty cool. I wasn't sure what the heck I was doing.
Right. Without me knowing anything, he would just say, I have a new technique. I just want you to tell me what's going on, what you feel in your body. And then I would just give him my observations of what's happening in my body. And I remember the first time he did it, I didn't even know he did it. And then he was supposed to text me or call me first. And then starting to tune into my body, and I'm telling him, first of all, whatever you've done, you've tapped into some archaic, powerful energy beyond anything I've ever felt or experienced before. And what did you say then when I said that?
There's some of my own contacts, some of that I've learned from getting higher brain living done. So it's certainly not the whole thing by any stretch of the imagination. And like I said, first and foremost, I am not doing higher brain living, but I'm certainly being influenced by it. But also, too, along those lines as well, we've had this discussion before, Jill, and you brought it up. You brought it up Saturday after I worked on Paul, and then I talked to you, and we talked about changing that, what I was saying. And
let me just explain this, though. He re-reviewed with me what the protocol was that I said, 5 weeks ago was phenomenal, but then I go, doesn't feel right to me today. And he goes, what? And I told him what part of it did not feel right. And then I said, you're not coming from the right place. And I said, my guides are saying, whatever they said. And then together we found the right.
Yeah. So what? Right.
It's
so
very
exactly
powerful.
what I was saying, and that's
Very
what I
powerful.
did with you. And that's what I did with you today. Because it all comes down to most stuff that we do,
Like
most stuff that I do, most stuff that we do. We're bringing the darkness to the light. Like we come in.
That's what I said. Because instead of trying to bring the light to the darkness, you have to be open to receive. Period.
Yeah, well, instead of bringing the darkness to the light, you bring the lightness to the darkness.
Right. You bring the light.
Right.
Go ahead. Go on.
You turn on the light to illuminate what's always been there. And
but there was still more. There was still more in the wording that we came up with. But after he worked on me today, and this has never happened. I'm his guinea pig. He always does work on me. Never has a song came to my head before, and this was after I told him that the certain section didn't feel right anymore, and he changed it to an I am type of statement. And what happened? The song Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door started playing in my head. And I said, holy moly, do we have something